Welcome to a special Inauguration Day episode of CUNY Laureates. Democracy is a precious thing and fragile. Protecting democracy means protecting the right to choose our leaders, but it also involves empowering people to be heard by their government and to hold it accountable. Today, we look back at 3 remarkable CUNY graduates who won major awards in their respective fields and who all, in their own way, furthered the cause of democracy in America.
First, City College graduate Kenneth Arrow's love of mathematics resulted in some groundbreaking economic theories and some tough lessons about how society makes choices. Then, Queens College and Baruch alum Cristina Jiménez Moreta helped win a historic victory for immigrant rights by sharing the stories of young people like herself. Finally, City College graduate A.M. Rosenthal climbed to the top of the New York Times masthead to steer the paper through one of the most important legal challenges in U.S. history. Since the dawn of civilization, human beings have been faced with tough choices. Over time, we got pretty good at choosing what's right for us as individuals. But what happens when we try to make choices that concern all of us? Are we just as good at choosing the right president as we are at choosing the right slice of pizza?
This is a story of a CUNY graduate who became a Nobel laureate and the development of social choice theory.
Born in 1921, Kenneth Arrow was only 10 when the Great Depression came knocking on the door of his family home. For Kenneth's father, Harry, this was not the first taste of poverty. A first-generation immigrant, Harry Arrow fought his way up the social ladder, and after graduating from Townsend Harris High School and earning a degree from NYU Business School, he firmly established himself in the banking industry. Now, after living in considerable affluence for over a decade, the Arrows lost most of their accumulated wealth and were forced to move out of the city. For Kenneth, this only meant one thing: more time to read. Of course, among the things we had left were the books, he later said. My parents were people of taste. What they did buy, they bought well. The furniture was good quality. The books were good quality. Like his father, Kenneth attended Townsend Harris High School and after graduating, enrolled in the neighboring City College of New York. The only tuition-free institution of higher education in New York, the poor man's Harvard, as it was fondly known at the time, was a safe haven for the children of the Depression era. Despite the circumstances, the student body became one of the most successful and most productive generations in the history of education. Studying along with future Nobel laureates such as Julian Schwinger and Herbert Hauptman, and under the mentorship of Emil Post and Alfred Tarski, Kenneth developed a strong passion for formal logic and mathematics. After graduating from the City College in 1940, Kenneth decided to pursue a master's degree in mathematics at Columbia University, a choice of studies his father did not expect. Though my father would have preferred if I had become a businessman, being a scholar was high in his value system, so there was certainly no opposition. Opposition, however, came in a different form. Faced with the outbreak of World War II, Kenneth made another fateful choice and decided to enlist. From 1942 to 1946, he served in the Air Corps as a weather officer, rising to the rank of captain. Luckily, his post was exclusively in the research field, and soon enough, Kenneth found a way to apply his talents. In his first published paper, Arrow used his knowledge of mathematics to calculate wind trajectories and determine the fastest paths for U.S. fighter planes to reach their targets in Europe. Originally used in combat planning, this study soon became widely known for its practical implications and is still being used for calculating the quickest routes in commercial aviation. After the war, Kenneth once again chose mathematics. But facing financial struggles, he accepted the offer for a fellowship in economics instead. "I was essentially bought into economics," he later said. More than just the study of commerce and finance, economics can also look more broadly at the behaviors and choices of individuals or groups within a shared system of resources. During the next couple of years spent at Columbia, Arrow started developing a keen interest in this side of economics. Working on his PhD dissertation, he decided to tackle the problem of collective decision-making, specifically in ranked voting electoral systems. It was long assumed that in an ideal democratic society, the decisions of the collective would mirror the preferences of individuals. Following this assumption, Arrow tried to create a mathematical formula that would allow decision-making mechanisms to seamlessly convert individual preferences into collective ones. With this goal in mind, he created a set of formal rules that would guarantee the fairness of this process.
So how can we run a class democratically? Everyone's for himself.
In short, Arrow assumed that if the majority of individuals preferred one choice over the other, then the group's decision should reflect that choice. He also assumed that no individual should have such power to always determine the preference of the group. A hypothetical person Arrow named the dictator. Well, you guessed it. After applying these fairness criteria into different types of ranked voting systems, Kenneth realized that none of the ranked voting systems could translate the vote of the people into the will of the people without breaking one of them. This unexpected result came to be known as Arrow's impossibility theorem. And the trouble was, its theoretical implications seemed to go far beyond the question of ranked voting systems. The impossibility of translating individual preferences into collective ones meant that many decision-making mechanisms in democratic societies had an inner flaw. Even worse, on a purely theoretical level, most of them couldn't exclude the existence of the dictator, an individual, or group of them whose preferences dictated the choices of everyone else. Luckily, the practical consequences of the theory remained debatable, or as Arrow would later put it, most systems are not going to work badly all the time. All I proved is that all can work badly at times. Despite his modesty, Kenneth's theorem proved impossibly fertile. It opened a completely new field of social research called the social choice theory. Its implications led to numerous debates in the scientific community and heralded major improvements across disciplines. From electoral systems to welfare economics, from public policies to corporate bargaining, it seemed that there was no area of research where Arrow's theorem couldn't be applied. His next major contribution came in the late 1950s. Building on the long-standing belief in the self-regulating nature of market economies, Arrow set out to find mathematical equations that would explain the complex relationship between supply and demand. To everyone's surprise, his effort ended up in a mathematical proof of general equilibrium theory, a theory that the interplay between supply and demand in competing markets results in overall economic equilibrium and, in the long run, benefits societies. And just like that, in one stroke, Arrow caught the invisible hand of the market and turned it into a mathematical formula. Arrow spent the rest of his career teaching at Stanford and Harvard. Known for his many interests, he continued to translate common-sense concepts into elegant mathematical formulas. His contributions to risk analysis, financial investments, and corporate finances made him part of the investment management pantheon. Yet, his contribution to social choice theory, along with his long-lasting interest in healthcare policy and welfare theory, showed the side of his character that tried to find equilibrium far beyond the market economy. A paradoxical combination that started with his bachelor's degree in social science and mathematics from the City College of New York, and, in his own words, remained prognostic of his interests until the end of his life. In 1972, Kenneth Arrow received the Nobel Prize in Economics for his pioneering contributions to general economic equilibrium theory and welfare theory.
So, the next time you're faced with tough choices, try to remember, having so many of them may not necessarily be a bad thing. Democracy is more than just voting. It's a constant conversation about what rights a people have and who gets to claim those rights. For one young woman, that meant refusing to accept that she could have fewer rights simply because of where she was born. This is the story of a CUNY graduate who became a MacArthur Fellow and the role she played in that long, storied struggle to expand the meaning of democracy.
I was born in Quito, the capital of Ecuador. Both of my parents were really financially responsible for their families at a young age, and they had dreams of a college education, but they didn't have that support. So they had big dreams about their kids, that they will have a different life. And unfortunately, in the 1990s, as a result of economic crisis, political instability in Ecuador, we found ourselves in a place where we had to make choices as a family of whether we could pay for rent or pay for food. So finding themselves really at the brink of poverty, my family decided to come and take the very difficult decision to leave everything behind, their family, their home, everything they knew. And came to the United States, I think as many refugees and migrants have come over time, seeking a better life and hoping that in this country they'll have the opportunity for their kids to have what they did not have.
Growing up in New York City, I knew that after our tourist visa expired, we became undocumented immigrants. I knew that I needed to hide this part of my life, that I couldn't share it because our family could get caught and could get detained by immigration authorities. So early on, I understood we were different, and I understood that because of our immigration status, we will be treated differently. The terrorist attacks of 9/11 were certainly painful and traumatizing and devastating for the country, for all of us and for me. But I will say that that grief and that fear was very short-lived, because then immediately I realized immigrants, particularly I think starting with Muslim communities, have become all suspects. We are hearing from neighbors that start talking about people disappearing from one day to the other because people were being detained and deported. And also that meant that at the time, CUNY felt that they needed to charge undocumented students out of state tuition rates, even though we're state residents, which meant quadruple the tuition costs, which made it impossible to access higher education. So the way that I'm able to overcome that hurdle is that students in CUNY, they came together to file a lawsuit against the state and the City University of New York, and students were protesting, were holding rallies, and I remember my dad bringing the newspaper home and saying, look, there's students like you fighting for their right to higher education, to accomplish their college dreams. That makes it possible for me, a few months before the first fall semester at the City University of New York, to be able to start school. Queens College became my school, and I was able to start my first semester there because a movement of people made it possible.
As a result of the anti-immigrant wave of attacks post 9/11, what you saw was a very vibrant movement led by immigrant communities, Muslim communities, refugee communities, that started to push back against deportations. So in this vibrant moment of young people coming together, we connect with each other around these deportation cases. We wanted to make sure that we had a sustainable movement of young people that will be able to find their voice, build community, and take action in their communities and nationally. And United We Dream comes out of that dream. And we created the organization in 2008 with the aim, and our main campaign was to, push for the DREAM Act.
The DREAM Act says if you were brought here as a child, you have good moral character, and attend college or enlist in the military, we're going to give you a chance to be legal in America and contribute to this country.
Groups are strategizing. We are also training people. People are building community and supporting each other. And we're also building support for this campaign and mobilizing people to call their members of Congress, to have meetings with members of Congress. So all of these groups come together to fight for the DREAM Act, but the DREAM Act fails for the first time in an official vote in 2010. And instead of that moment breaking our movement or even the organization, what ends up happening is that we really come back with more strength and motivation, and what we think about the strategy changes. We know that Congress may not be able to move with the votes to pass the DREAM Act, but we know that President Obama had campaigned on his support for the DREAM Act and undocumented communities, and that he was also working to be reelected. And after 2 years of relentless campaigning and reminding the administration that they had the power to stop the deportations of young people, the administration met our demand, and they created the DACA program in 2012.
Effective immediately, the Department of Homeland Security is taking steps to lift the shadow of deportation from these young people. Over the next few months, eligible individuals who do not present a risk to national security or public safety will be able to request temporary relief from deportation proceedings and apply for work authorization.
Bienvenidos a Café con Felo. Today we're going to have a conversation with a powerful voice and fierce advocate for the undocumented, Ms. Cristina Jiménez. Great to have you here.
Great to be here with you, fellow. Thanks for having me. Immigrants sharing their stories, being the ones that are the protagonists of our fight, have transformed the way that we talk about immigration and have complicated the conversation about immigration and immigrants in this country in a way that it challenges dominant narratives that have been designed to dehumanize us. Immigrants come here seeking a better life, believing truly in those values that this country evokes, that we know we're so far away from in many ways. But because we live in those values, we're doing everything that we can to push this country and to get this country to live up to those values.
What I want to remember is that in this country, I experienced the most discrimination and racial hatred that I've ever experienced in my life. And I've also experienced the love and the courage of communities fighting for justice. And I learned that from the movements and communities here in the US. So I hold both. And I think that it should be okay to be able to hold that tension. The possibility of us being able to do good while also recognizing what's wrong. And to realize that, it is because of that community, because of those people in this country that have taken action for change, that my story is even possible.
The press and the government have always been at odds with one another. The press wants to expose truths and sell papers. Government wishes to conceal its mistakes and spread its message. This is the story of a CUNY graduate who became a Pulitzer Prize winner and oversaw one of the linchpin legal cases that assured no matter who is in power in the White House, the press's unassailable right to publish.
1969, Abraham Michael Rosenthal was installed as the executive editor of the New York Times. Rosenthal had climbed the editorial hierarchy at the Times, rising from a campus reporter in 1943 to the top position more than 20 years later. The Vietnam War was raging, and the country was filled with war protesters, spurred on by pictures, articles, and television footage of dead American soldiers, scorched villages, and innocent Vietnamese civilians being traumatized by the war. It was against this backdrop that the Times was gifted a trove of classified documents called the Report of the Office of the Secretary of Defense Vietnam Task Force. These were secret documents that the Defense Secretary of the time, Robert McNamara, had commissioned to outline the long history of the Vietnam conflict. An advisor to McNamara, Daniel Ellsberg, who had grown deeply disillusioned with the war effort, leaked the documents to Times Vietnam correspondent Neil Sheehan. As editor-in-chief, Rosenthal set up a small team in a New York Hilton Midtown hotel room to read through these documents, and he was astounded by what he saw. In 1986, he recounted,
"When this pile of documents came to us, and we understood after a while what it was, we were looking at the secret political war, political actions, and diplomatic actions of the United States."
The Pentagon Papers, as they came to be called, detailed blunders, missteps, and the expansion of the war that the U.S. government had not shared with Americans. The revelations would be a serious blow to the administrations that had overseen the conflict. Rosenthal brought it to the attention of the Times publisher, Arthur Sulzberger, and at first, the Times law firm advised against publishing. But in-house lawyer James Goodale prevailed by insisting on the First Amendment right, that the press had the freedom to print material about the government in the service of the people. On June 13, 1971, the first of 3 installments was published. President Nixon immediately went to war against the Times.
Times said, just 3 statements that we're up against them. It's Henry Sage's conspiracy about, what do you think? It's absolutely clear. Look at their they put that money in. Eat up shit. It's a vicious war. Right? Sure, we're all against it. God damn. And if they're going to go to this way, we're going to fight everything we got. We just takes the chance.
The Department of Justice, under Nixon's directive, issued a temporary restraining order against further publication. But the Times and the Washington Post fought back in a case called New York Times v. U.S. Government that went to the Supreme Court. The court ruled 6-3 that the Times and other outlets, in the interests of public awareness, could continue to publish these papers. A.M. Rosenthal was a decisive force in the decision to publish the Pentagon Papers. It remains one of the most significant court cases in U.S. law related to freedom of the press, cementing the press's ability to expose governments. But Rosenthal rose to the pinnacle of U.S. journalism from a most humble beginning. Abraham Michael Rosenthal was born in 1922 in Sault Ste. Marie, Canada, the son of a Russian immigrant. In his early years, his father, a house painter, snuck across the U.S. border, eventually settling in the Bronx. Abraham had osteomyelitis in his legs that forced him to drop out of high school and become a charity case in a Minnesota hospital where he eventually healed. Eager to pursue a degree, Rosenthal enrolled for free at City College. Soon after, he began to write for the student paper, The Campus. He later recounted, "City College is important to generations of New Yorkers. It gave us a chance to grasp what we could never otherwise attain, life work that fulfilled our desires and capacities. The tuition then was free, which was only a little more than I could afford." A few years later, while still at City College, he landed a $12 a week job in 1943 as a campus stringer for the New York Times. He switched to night classes to finish his degree in 1949. After covering campuses for the paper, he was asked to be a foreign correspondent. He was first assigned to New Delhi and reported all around the region, including Tibet. These early assignments embedded in Rosenthal a firm belief in freedom that would later inform his Pentagon Papers decision. Afterwards, he covered the United Nations, Japan, and Poland. In Poland, as foreign correspondent for the Times, he wrote about the communist regime and its leader, Władysław Gomulka, in such terms that he was expelled from the country after 2 years. The Polish government said in his expulsion order, "You have written very deeply and in detail about the internal situation, party, and leadership matters. The Polish government cannot tolerate such probing reporting." In 1960, A.M. Rosenthal won the Pulitzer Prize for his international reporting. The committee cited those sentences when Rosenthal was awarded the prize. In 1963, he moved on to an editorial role. He earned a reputation for being a hard-nosed editor with high expectations. Some felt him intimidating and unfair, but many of his supporters felt his expectations were necessary for a paper like the New York Times.
The Times is like a house. You can add a room or add a little floor or a little section, but it's got a foundation where you have a group of men and women that will have a shared idea of what the Times ought to be. Otherwise, it'd be a different paper every day.
Over the next 23 years, he overhauled the Times for a new era. The paper on newsstands and the internet today would not exist in its current form without his oversight.
We are one of the last, or maybe the last, large news gathering paper in the world. But we really want to print our own news. We have people all over the world. I don't think there's a foreign staff like the Times. I don't think there is a national staff like it.
He introduced multiple sections, Metro, Business, and innovated the Sunday paper with new sections and initiatives. He also initiated a national edition. Advertising boomed, and the paper, once on shaky financial footing, prospered. After he was forced to retire at the mandatory age of 65, he became a columnist for the Times, writing on topics ranging from the Middle East, international affairs, and national politics. But it might be his elevation of the standards of journalism that Rosenthal will be most remembered for. "Keep the paper straight" is written on his gravestone, and his epitaph speaks to his editorial rule to stay as neutral as possible in writing and reporting. And although he may have butted heads with staff over the years, he was called brilliant, but also abrasive. The Times remains one of the most respected newspapers, in no small part due to his influence.
I know if the Times ever were to cease, God forbid, you could not recreate it, because now it's built around a lifetime. So a lot of people, reporters, art critics, editors, people come from all over, and they become part of the Times. And if this Times disappeared, this whole treasury of people also disappeared. You couldn't find these people again.